Sarah Thompson stood before the mirror in her law office, adjusting her blazer one final time before heading to the Atlanta Legal Conference. At 32, she had already made a name for herself as one of the city's most promising attorneys. Her dark skin glowed under the office lights, and her carefully braided hair was pulled back into a professional style that had become her trademark. "You're going to be late," her assistant Jenny called from the doorway. "The keynote speaker starts in 30 minutes. Sarah grabbed her leather briefcase, hurrying through the busy streets of downtown Atlanta. The September air was still warm, and the sun cast long shadows between the towering buildings. As she entered the conference center, she couldn't shake the feeling that something significant was about to happen. The main hall was packed with attorneys from across the Southeast. Sarah found a seat near the middle, pulling out her notebook as she always did. She believed in taking notes the old-fashioned way. Pen and paper helped her remember things better than any tablet could. That's when she first saw him. Marcus Reynolds walked onto the stage as one of the panel speakers. He was tall, confident, and commanded attention without trying. His charcoal gray suit fit perfectly, and his voice carried authority as he began discussing recent changes in corporate law. "He's from the Reynolds family," whispered an older attorney sitting next to Sarah. "Their law firm handles half the corporate cases in Georgia." Sarah nodded politely but focused on Marcus's presentation. He made complex legal concepts sound simple, and his subtle humor kept the audience engaged. What caught her attention most was how he emphasized the importance of ethics in corporate practice, something rare in their field. After the panel discussion, Sarah headed to the networking reception. She was filling her plate with fruit when someone reached for the same strawberry. It was Marcus. "I believe you were in the third row, taking notes," he said, smiling. "I don't often see lawyers using paper notebooks anymore." Sarah laughed. "Some old habits are worth keeping. I'm Sarah Thompson from Morrison and Clark." "The Sarah Thompson who won the Westbrook case last month?" Marcus looked impressed. "That was brilliant work. Would you mind sharing your insights over coffee?" They found a quiet corner away from the crowd. What was meant to be a brief professional discussion turned into a 2-hour conversation. They talked about their cases, their views on justice, and their experiences in law school. Sarah was surprised by how easy it was to talk to him, despite his family's reputation for being extremely private and exclusive. "I should get your number," Marcus said as the reception was ending. "For professional consultation, of course." Sarah raised an eyebrow, smiling. "Of course, strictly professional." That evening, as Sarah drove home to her apartment in Midtown, she couldn't stop thinking about their conversation. Marcus was different from what she'd expected of a Reynolds. He seemed genuine, down-to-earth, and actually interested in making a difference in the legal world. Her phone buzzed with a text. "Thank you for making a rather dull conference memorable. Would you like to continue our professional consultation over dinner tomorrow, Marcus?" Sarah hesitated for a moment. Dating within Atlanta's legal circle could be complicated, especially with someone from such a prominent family. But something about Marcus felt right. "Dinner sounds great," she replied. What Sarah didn't know then was that their meeting had not gone unnoticed. In a corner of the conference hall, someone had been watching them carefully, taking notes of their own. The security camera footage from that day would later become crucial evidence in events that would shake Atlanta's legal community to its core. At night, Sarah called her best friend Lisa to tell her about Marcus. "A Reynolds. Girl, you're playing with fire," Lisa warned. "That family has more secrets than the Pentagon." "He's different," Sarah insisted. "Besides, it's just dinner." But as Sarah fell asleep that night, she couldn't help but feel that she was standing on the edge of something much bigger than a simple dinner date. The city lights twinkled outside her window, and somewhere across town, Marcus Reynolds was thinking about her too, unaware of the storm that their meeting would eventually unleash. Little did either of them know that this was just the beginning of a story that would test their beliefs, challenge their hearts, and expose truths that some of Atlanta's most powerful people had worked for decades to keep hidden. 6 months into their relationship, Sarah and Marcus had become Atlanta's most talked-about couple in legal circles. Their dinner dates at exclusive restaurants, weekend trips to Savannah, and appearances at charity events made them regular features in local society columns. But beneath the glamour, the first signs of trouble were beginning to appear. It started with small things. At a Reynolds family dinner, Sarah noticed how Marcus's mother, Eleanor, always seemed to address everyone at the table except her. The house staff would hover uncomfortably whenever Sarah touched anything in their mansion, as if expecting her to steal or break their precious antiques. "You're imagining things," Marcus assured her one evening as they drove home from another tense family dinner. "Mother's just old-fashioned. She'll warm up to you." But Sarah knew better. She'd grown up learning to read the subtle signs of prejudice, the small gestures that spoke louder than words. Still, her love for Marcus made her want to believe him. One afternoon, while Sarah was preparing for a major case in her office, her assistant Jenny rushed in with an unusual envelope. Inside was an invitation to the Reynolds' annual garden party, an event known for bringing together Georgia's most influential families. "Marcus wants me to meet everyone," Sarah told Jenny, trying to sound excited despite her growing unease. The day of the party arrived with perfect spring weather. Sarah wore a sophisticated cream-colored dress that complemented her dark skin beautifully. As Marcus led her through crowds of Atlanta's elite, she couldn't help but notice the whispers and stares. "That's her? A Thompson? I've never heard of her family." Marcus could have chosen anyone. Eleanor Reynolds stood near the rose garden, surrounded by her social circle. When Marcus brought Sarah over, his mother's smile never reached her eyes. "Sarah, dear," Eleanor said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "That's an interesting choice of dress." Before Sarah could respond, an elderly woman in the group spoke up. "Why, Eleanor, remember when we had help who looked just like her? Such good people, knowing their place." The group laughed softly, while Marcus shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. Sarah felt her chest tighten, but years of courtroom experience helped her maintain her composure. Later that evening, alone in their car, Sarah finally spoke up. "You need to understand what's happening, Marcus. Your family." "They're trying their best," Marcus interrupted. "Change takes time. Let's not make everything about race." Sarah fell silent, remembering her father's words. "People show you who they are. Believe them the first time." The following week, strange things began happening at Sarah's law firm. Several of her major clients suddenly withdrew their cases. Her secretary overheard rumors about maintaining traditional values in the legal community. One rainy morning, Sarah arrived at work to find an elderly partner waiting in her office. Mr. Clark, who had always supported her career, looked troubled. "Sarah, my dear," he began hesitantly, "I received a call from Reynolds Sr. yesterday. He had some concerns about your relationship with his son affecting business relationships." Sarah sat down slowly, her worst fears confirming themselves. "What exactly did he say?" "Nothing direct, of course. These people never do. But the message was clear. They're worried about their family's reputation." That evening, Sarah waited for Marcus at their favorite restaurant, determined to have an honest conversation. He arrived late, looking distracted. "My father had an interesting talk with me today," Marcus said, not meeting her eyes. "He thinks we might be moving too fast." Sarah watched him carefully. "And what do you think?" "Maybe he has a point. Our worlds are very different, Sarah. The pressure from clients, the family traditions. Different worlds?" Sarah's voice was quiet but firm. "Or is it just different skin?" Marcus flinched but didn't answer. In his silence, Sarah heard everything she needed to know. Outside the restaurant, thunder rolled across the Atlanta sky. Sarah thought about her mother's words when she first mentioned dating Marcus. "Baby, make sure he's strong enough to stand with you, not just by you." As rain began to fall, Sarah realized this was more than a test of their love. It was a test of character. And so far, Marcus Reynolds, for all his charm and promises, was failing miserably. What neither of them knew was that these tensions were just the beginning. Forces much larger than family disapproval were about to transform their lives in ways neither could imagine. Despite the growing tensions, Marcus surprised everyone by proposing to Sarah during a romantic weekend in Savannah. The 3-carat diamond ring sparkled on her finger, but Sarah couldn't shake off the feeling that something wasn't right. Still, she said yes, choosing to believe in their love over her doubts. 2 months into their engagement, while Sarah was preparing for a major discrimination case, she received the first anonymous text. "He's not who you think he is. Watch him carefully." She deleted the message, dismissing it as someone trying to cause trouble. But more messages followed, each more specific than the last. The latest one made her stomach turn. Ask him about his meetings with Rebecca at the Blue Ridge coffee shop. Sarah had heard the name Rebecca before. Marcus's college girlfriend from a suitable family, as his mother once pointed out. He had claimed they hadn't spoken in years. One Tuesday afternoon, Sarah left work early, telling herself she was being paranoid. Still, she drove to Blue Ridge coffee shop. Through the window, she saw them, Marcus and a stunning blonde woman, sitting too close, laughing too intimately. Sarah watched as Rebecca White touched Marcus's hand, and he didn't pull away. The scene felt surreal, like watching a movie about someone else's life. She took a deep breath and walked into the coffee shop. Sarah, Marcus jumped up, his face pale. This isn't what it looks like. Rebecca smiled coldly, gathering her designer purse. I'll leave you two to talk, she said, her voice smooth as silk. As she passed Sarah, she whispered, he always comes back to what's familiar. After Rebecca left, Marcus scrambled to explain. She's helping with the case, that's all. You know how important the Robertson merger is to my family. Sarah sat down, her lawyer's mind already connecting dots she'd been avoiding. The Robertson merger, the same company that suddenly dropped my firm last month. Marcus looked away, and in that moment, Sarah saw the truth. The clients she'd lost, the whispers at parties, the sudden appearance of Rebecca. It wasn't coincidence. That evening, Sarah worked late at her office, diving into research. She discovered that Rebecca wasn't just Marcus's ex-girlfriend. She was now the lead corporate counsel for one of the biggest investment firms in the Southeast. Sarah's phone buzzed with another anonymous message. Look deeper into the Robertson merger. Not everything is about love. As she dug through public records, a pattern emerged. Companies associated with the Reynolds family had a history of suspicious acquisitions, always preceded by unexplained client migrations from competing firms. Sarah's assistant Jenny knocked on her door around midnight. You should see this, she said, handing over a file. Someone left it at reception. No name. Inside were photos, dozens of them. Marcus and Rebecca had various meetings over the past month, but they weren't alone. Business leaders, judges, and even a state senator appeared in the images. There's more, Jenny said quietly. Remember that discrimination case you're working on? 3 of the victims tried to hire the Reynolds firm first. They were turned away. Sarah stared at her engagement ring, remembering Marcus's words about tradition, family expectations, and keeping certain things separate. Everything was connecting in ways she hadn't wanted to see. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was Marcus. Mother's arranged our engagement party for next Saturday. Wear something appropriate. Sarah felt a chill. She'd been so focused on proving herself worthy of the Reynolds family, she failed to question whether they were worthy of her. Later that night, as she drove home through Atlanta's empty streets, Sarah passed the coffee shop again. Through the window, she saw Rebecca still there, now meeting with Marcus's father. They were smiling, sharing what looked like celebration drinks. At home, Sarah found a hand-delivered envelope waiting at her door. Inside was a formal invitation to join one of Atlanta's most prestigious law firms, the same one representing the opposition in her discrimination case. The pieces were falling into place, revealing a picture far uglier than simple prejudice. This wasn't just about a family disapproving of their son's black fiancée. This was about power, money, and a system designed to keep certain people in their place. As Sarah laid awake that night, another text arrived. Tomorrow, 9 a.m., parking garage level 3. If you want the whole truth, be there. Sarah looked at her engagement ring one last time, remembering how it had once represented love and hope. Now it felt like a beautiful trap, designed to blind her to an ugly truth she was just beginning to uncover. What she would learn the next morning would change not just her life, but the entire power structure of Atlanta's legal world. The morning of the parking garage meeting arrived with a heavy fog covering Atlanta. Sarah arrived early, her heart pounding as she parked on level 3. A figure emerged from the shadows. It was Jenny, her assistant, looking nervous but determined. I couldn't tell you in the office, Jenny said, handing Sarah a thick manila envelope. They have ears everywhere. I used to work for Rebecca White before joining your firm. Inside the envelope, Sarah found documents that made her legal training kick into high gear. There were emails between Marcus, Rebecca, and the Reynolds family, outlining a carefully orchestrated plan. The engagement party wasn't just a celebration. It was meant to be Sarah's professional funeral. They're going to announce your new position at their law firm during the party, Jenny explained. Once you're there, they'll bury your discrimination case. You'll be too conflicted to continue it. Sarah's phone buzzed. Marcus had sent a text. Don't forget our lunch with Mother. She's planning to take you shopping for the party. As Sarah drove to the Reynolds mansion, the weight of the documents in her briefcase felt like lead. Eleanor Reynolds was waiting in the garden, perfectly coiffed as always, with Marcus and Rebecca beside her. Sarah's stomach dropped. This wasn't supposed to be a lunch with Rebecca. Sarah, darling, Eleanor's voice dripped honey. We thought it was time for a family discussion. Marcus couldn't meet Sarah's eyes as his mother continued. Rebecca has some wonderful news. The firm is offering you a partnership position. We can finally put that unfortunate discrimination case behind us. Unfortunate? Sarah's voice was steady. You mean the case where your company systematically denied promotions to minority employees? The garden fell silent. Sarah pulled out the documents Jenny had given her. Or perhaps we should discuss these emails? The ones showing how you plan to use my engagement to bury evidence. Marcus finally spoke, his voice weak. Sarah, please, think about our future. Some battles aren't worth fighting. That's where you're wrong. Sarah stood up. Some battles define who we are. Rebecca smirked. Don't be dramatic, Sarah. This is business. Marcus understands that. Why do you think he proposed? The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. She turned to Marcus. Is that true? Was the proposal part of their plan? His silence was deafening. Eleanor sighed dramatically. Really, dear? Did you actually believe Marcus would marry you? We had to stop that discrimination case somehow. You were becoming problematic. Sarah looked at the three of them, Eleanor's smug satisfaction, Rebecca's cold triumph, and Marcus's guilty avoidance. She slowly removed her engagement ring and placed it on the garden table. You know what's truly problematic? Sarah's voice was calm. Assuming I'd choose a ring over justice. Assuming I'd betray my principles for acceptance into your world. She opened her briefcase again, pulling out more papers. These are copies of everything. Every email, every planned merger, every discriminatory decision. I'm not the only one who has them. Marcus stood up quickly. Sarah, don't do anything rash. Rash? Sarah laughed. No, Marcus. Rash was thinking you had the courage to love someone your family didn't approve of. Rash was believing you could stand up for what's right. As she turned to leave, Eleanor called out, You'll never work in Atlanta again. Sarah stopped at the garden gate. Maybe not in your Atlanta, Mrs. Reynolds, but there's a bigger world out there, one that's changing whether you like it or not. In her car, Sarah's phone buzzed with messages from Marcus. Please come back. We can work this out. Don't throw everything away. She blocked his number without responding. That evening, Sarah sat in her office, looking at the city lights. Jenny brought her coffee and sat down quietly. What will you do now? Jenny asked. Sarah picked up the discrimination case file. Now we fight. Not just for this case, but for every person they thought they could silence. As she worked late into the night, Sarah realized that sometimes the greatest betrayals lead to the clearest vision. Marcus and his family had tried to buy her silence with a ring and false promises. Instead, they had given her something far more valuable, the truth about who they were, and more importantly, who she was. What Sarah didn't know yet was that her decision that day would set in motion events that would shake Atlanta's legal establishment to its core. The real battle was just beginning, and she was more than ready for war. 1 week after the confrontation at the Reynolds mansion, Sarah sat in a crowded courthouse, waiting for her discrimination case to be called. The plaintiffs, 15 former employees of Reynolds Corporation, sat nervously behind her. Their lives and careers had been damaged by the company's practices, and they were counting on her. Just as the judge was about to enter, the courtroom doors swung open. Marcus walked in with Rebecca and a team of corporate lawyers. He looked different, colder, more like his father. He didn't even glance in Sarah's direction. All rise, the bailiff called out. But before the proceedings could begin, Sarah's phone vibrated. An unknown number had sent her a video. She quietly excused herself and stepped into the hallway to watch it. The video showed Marcus's father in his office, clearly recorded secretly. He was speaking to a group of executives. We have ways of handling these people. They don't belong in our corporate culture. If they complain, we have friends in the right places. Sarah's hands shook as she watched. The timestamp showed this was recorded just 3 days ago. As she turned to go back into the courtroom, she found Jenny rushing toward her. "Sarah, you need to see this," Jenny whispered, holding out a stack of papers. "Someone just delivered these to our office. They're internal memos from Reynolds Corp going back 5 years. The documents revealed a systematic pattern of discrimination far worse than they'd initially thought. It wasn't just about promotions. It was about creating a hostile environment to force minorities to quit, then paying off judges to dismiss any lawsuits." Back in the courtroom, Sarah noticed something strange. Rebecca kept checking her phone, looking increasingly uncomfortable. During a brief recess, Sarah overheard Rebecca arguing with Marcus in the hallway. "This isn't what I signed up for," Rebecca hissed. "Discriminating against employees is one thing, but bribing judges?" Marcus grabbed her arm. "Keep your voice down. You're in too deep to back out now." Sarah quietly recorded the exchange on her phone. When court resumed, she noticed Rebecca was missing from the defense table. As Sarah presented her opening arguments, she felt a new confidence. "Your Honor, this case is about more than just workplace discrimination. It's about a systematic abuse of power that goes to the highest levels of Atlanta's legal system." The judge leaned forward. "Those are serious allegations, Ms. Thompson. I hope you can substantiate them." "Indeed I can, Your Honor." Sarah motioned for her assistant to bring forward the new evidence. "And I have a surprise witness who can corroborate everything." The courtroom doors opened again. Rebecca White walked in, her head held high, carrying a briefcase full of documents. Marcus's face went pale. His father, sitting in the gallery, stood up abruptly. "This is outrageous. She's under a confidentiality agreement." Rebecca walked to the witness stand. "No amount of money is worth selling your soul," she announced clearly. "I'm here to tell the truth." What followed was 4 hours of testimony that shook the Atlanta legal community to its core. Rebecca revealed how she had been part of the plan to stop Sarah's investigation by using Marcus's relationship with her. But in the process, she had discovered evidence of crimes that went far beyond discrimination. The Reynolds family didn't just discriminate, Rebecca testified. They built an entire network of corruption to protect their prejudices. As the day went on, reporters filled the courtroom. Sarah watched as Marcus's confident facade crumbled with each new revelation. His father had already left, probably calling every connection he had to try to stop what was coming. By evening, when court adjourned for the day, the story was breaking on every local news channel. Sarah's phone was flooded with messages from other lawyers offering support and more witnesses wanting to come forward. Outside the courthouse, Marcus tried to approach her one last time. "Sarah, please. I didn't know how deep it went. I was just doing what my family expected." Sarah looked at him with pity. "That's always been your problem, Marcus. You were so busy meeting expectations that you forgot to be human." As she walked away, Sarah felt lighter than she had in months. Sometimes losing what you thought you wanted leads you to exactly where you need to be. The fight wasn't over, it was just beginning. But now she had truth on her side, and more allies than she'd ever expected. What no one knew yet was that this case would become the catalyst for the biggest legal shakeup in Atlanta's history. The courthouse buzzed with tension on the third day of the trial. Sarah sat reviewing her notes when a court officer handed her an unmarked envelope. Inside was a USB drive with a post-it note that read, "Security footage from Reynolds Corp. Last 5 years." Sarah's hands trembled as she plugged the drive into her laptop. The videos showed board meetings where Marcus's father openly discussed their cleansing strategy, removing minority employees through false performance reviews and created incidents. "Miss Thompson?" A deep voice interrupted her thoughts. She looked up to see FBI agent James Carter. "We've been watching the Reynolds family for months. Your case just gave us the opening we needed." In the courtroom, Sarah noticed Marcus looking increasingly nervous. His perfectly pressed suit couldn't hide the sweat on his forehead. His father was noticeably absent. Rebecca took the stand again, this time revealing recordings of phone calls between the Reynolds family and various judges. The courtroom gasped as she played a conversation where Marcus's father bragged about having judges in their pocket. During the lunch break, Sarah received an urgent call from Jenny. Turn on the news. They're arresting Marcus's father. On the courthouse steps, reporters swarmed as FBI agents led Richard Reynolds away in handcuffs. The mighty Reynolds empire was crumbling in real time on national television. When court resumed, Marcus's lawyers asked for a recess. Sarah watched as they huddled in the corner, their whispered arguments growing heated. Marcus kept shaking his head, his face ashen. Finally, Marcus stood up. Your Honor, I request permission to address the court. The judge nodded, and Marcus walked to the front. For the first time since the trial began, he looked directly at Sarah. I need to tell the truth, his voice cracked. Everything Ms. Thompson and Ms. White have said is true. Our family has been systematically discriminating against minorities for years. I knew about it, I participated in it, and I used my relationship with Sarah Thompson to try to stop this case. Gasps filled the courtroom. Sarah sat perfectly still, her face neutral despite the storm of emotions inside her. Marcus continued, My father was arrested today because we broke the law, but we broke something more important. We broke the basic rules of human decency. I can't undo what I did to Sarah, or to all the people our company hurt, but I can tell the truth now. As Marcus detailed years of discrimination and corruption, Sarah noticed Rebecca quietly crying in the gallery. Later, she would learn that Rebecca had been working undercover with the FBI for months, gathering evidence while pretending to be part of the Reynolds scheme. The judge called Sarah and the defense lawyers to his chambers. Given these developments, Ms. Thompson, what do your clients want? Sarah laid out their demands. Full compensation for all discriminated employees, a complete overhaul of the company's hiring practices, and a substantial fund for minority scholarships in business and law. By evening, the Reynolds Corporation had agreed to everything. The case that had started as a simple discrimination suit had exposed one of the biggest corruption scandals in Atlanta's history. Outside the courthouse, reporters surrounded Sarah. How does it feel to bring down one of Atlanta's most powerful families? Sarah thought carefully before answering. This was never about bringing anyone down. It was about lifting people up, lifting up justice, equality, and truth. As she walked to her car, she heard footsteps behind her. It was Marcus. Sarah, he started. Don't, she cut him off. You made your choices long before you met me. I was just the one who finally made you face them. That night, Sarah sat in her office looking at the city lights. Jenny brought her a cup of coffee and the evening newspaper. The headline read, Reynolds' Empire Falls. Justice Prevails. What happens now? Jenny asked. Sarah smiled, thinking of all the people who would finally get justice. Now we make sure this never happens again. One case at a time, one truth at a time. What she didn't know then was that her victory would inspire a wave of similar cases across the country. The fall of the Reynolds Empire was just the beginning of a much bigger change. And somewhere in Atlanta, Marcus sat alone in his empty mansion, finally understanding what his prejudices had cost him, not just Sarah's love, but his own soul. 3 months after the Reynolds trial, Sarah sat in her new office overlooking downtown Atlanta. Her successful case had made her one of the most sought-after civil rights attorneys in the South. But today, she was staring at a shocking document on her desk. The FBI had just released their complete investigation file on the Reynolds case. What caught her attention wasn't about Marcus or his father. It was about Rebecca White. She wasn't just any FBI informant. She was a highly decorated undercover agent who had spent 5 years infiltrating corrupt corporate families across the country. Sarah's phone rang. It was Rebecca herself. I guess you've seen the files, she said. Can we meet? They met at a small cafe away from the business district. Rebecca looked different, more confident, without the artificial polish she'd worn in her role as Marcus's girlfriend. I chose Marcus as my target 3 years ago, Rebecca explained. We knew his family was corrupt, but we needed someone on the inside. Then you came along, and everything changed. Changed how? Sarah asked, stirring her coffee. When Marcus fell for you, it was real. For the first time, he showed signs of breaking away from his family's influence. That's why they panicked. You weren't just a threat to their case, you were a threat to their entire way of life. Sarah absorbed this information, thinking about all the times she caught Marcus looking conflicted, torn between his feelings and his family's expectations. There's more, Rebecca continued. Yesterday, Marcus came to the FBI. He's offering to testify against other corrupt families in exchange for a reduced sentence for his father. Just then, Sarah's phone buzzed with breaking news. Marcus Reynolds exposes network of corporate corruption, multiple CEOs under investigation. Rebecca smiled. Your case didn't just bring down the Reynolds family. It's bringing down an entire system of privileged corruption, and it all started because you refused to be silenced. As they talked, more details emerged. Marcus had been secretly recording conversations since his father's arrest, gathering evidence against other powerful families who had similar discriminatory practices. Later that day, Sarah received an unexpected visitor in her office. Marcus's mother, Eleanor Reynolds. The once proud woman looked tired and aged. I came to apologize, Eleanor said quietly. Not just for what we did to you, but for everything we represented. It took losing everything to see how wrong we were. Sarah studied the woman who had once looked at her with such disdain. What will you do now? The mansion is being turned into a civil rights museum. Eleanor replied, it was Marcus's idea. He said if our family name is going to mean something, it should mean change. That evening, as Sarah worked late, Jenny brought in more files. Other discriminated employees from different companies were coming forward, inspired by her victory. There's something else, Jenny said. Marcus left this for you. It was a simple white envelope containing a letter. Sarah, I know an apology isn't enough, but you should know that meeting you didn't just change my life, it saved my soul. You showed me that real strength isn't in maintaining power, but in fighting for what's right. I'm testifying against everyone involved in this corruption. It's time to break the cycle. Thank you for showing me the way. Marcus. Sarah placed the letter in her desk drawer. She had long since moved past anger, finding purpose in the change her case had created. Rebecca called again later. You should know, the FBI is naming a new anti-discrimination task force after you. Your case has become the blueprint for fighting corporate corruption nationwide. As Sarah drove home that night, she passed the old Reynolds mansion. Workers were removing the family crest, preparing for its new role as a museum. She thought about how life had come full circle, how what started as a personal betrayal had turned into a movement for justice. The city lights reflected off her car window, and for the first time in months, she felt completely at peace. Sometimes the greatest victories come disguised as defeats, and the hardest lessons lead to the most important changes. What no one could predict was how this story would continue to ripple through corporate America, challenging old prejudices and creating new possibilities for justice. The eighth and final act was still to come, and it would change everything. 1 year after the Reynolds case, Sarah stood at a podium in Washington, D.C., addressing a congressional hearing on corporate discrimination. The room was packed with senators, civil rights leaders, and media from across the nation. The Reynolds case wasn't just about one family or one company, Sarah testified. It exposed a network of systematic discrimination that had been operating in plain sight for generations. In the audience, Rebecca sat next to Marcus, who was there to testify about other corporate families still fighting against change. He looked different now, humbler, with purpose in his eyes rather than privilege. After the hearing, Sarah received news that changed everything. The Justice Department was creating a new civil rights enforcement division, and they wanted her to lead it. The position would mean overseeing cases like hers across the country. As she considered the offer, she received an unexpected visitor in her hotel room, Eleanor Reynolds, carrying a thick folder. These are the names, Eleanor said, placing the folder on the table. Every family, every company that was part of our network. Marcus missed some in his testimony, but I'm filling in the gaps. Sarah opened the folder, surprised by Eleanor's transformation from proud socialite to willing informant. Why now? Sarah asked. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. Because my grandson deserves a better world than the one we created. Sarah looked up, startled. Grandson. Rebecca is pregnant. Eleanor explained. She and Marcus found their way back to each other during all this, but this time for the right reasons. They're both working to make things right. Later that evening, at a small restaurant away from the political crowd, Marcus and Rebecca joined Sarah for dinner. The awkwardness had faded, replaced by a shared commitment to change. We're naming him James, Rebecca said, touching her belly. After my FBI mentor who started this investigation years ago. Marcus reached for Sarah's hand across the table. None of this would have happened if you hadn't stood up to us. You didn't just change our family, you're changing the whole system. Sarah looked at them, the FBI agent who went undercover to expose corruption, and the privileged son who finally chose justice over tradition. Their story had become part of a larger narrative about change and redemption. The next morning, Sarah accepted the Justice Department position. Her first act was to establish a whistleblower protection program for corporate employees reporting discrimination. At the press conference announcing her appointment, the young black law student asked her, "Ms. Thompson, do you regret what happened with the Reynolds family?" Sarah thought carefully before answering. "I regret that it took so much pain to create change. But I don't regret standing up for what's right. Sometimes love shows itself not in who we choose to be with, but in what we choose to fight for." 1 month later, Sarah attended the opening of the Civil Rights Museum in the former Reynolds mansion. Marcus and Rebecca were there, she visibly showing her pregnancy now. Eleanor stood quietly in the background, watching as visitors explored exhibits documenting both the history of discrimination and the fight for justice. The central exhibit featured the engagement ring Sarah had returned that day in the garden. Below it was a simple plaque. "Sometimes the price of justice is leaving behind what we thought we wanted to find what the world needs." As Sarah left the museum that evening, she saw a group of young law students touring the exhibits. Their faces reflected the diversity she had fought for, all colors, all backgrounds, all united in learning from the past to change the future. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jenny. "Turn on the news. 3 more companies just announced complete policy overhauls. It's happening." Sarah smiled, knowing that what had started as a broken engagement had become a movement. The Reynolds name would now be forever linked not with discrimination, but with transformation. As she drove home under the Atlanta stars, Sarah thought about how life's greatest disappointments sometimes lead to its most important victories. The broken heart she'd nursed a year ago had healed into something stronger, not just for her, but for generations to come. And somewhere in that same city, a baby was growing who would never know the weight of prejudice his family once carried, but would instead inherit a legacy of courage, change, and redemption. The end.